Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is the end of this particular purple sprouting broccoli, which has been fantastic this year. This is an early variety, and then behind me I've got a later variety which is still going strong. And if the weather doesn't get too warm, that should be harvestable for another week or two. But this has started to open out, and those tight florets have become loose and are starting to flower. And with a few more hot days, the whole thing will all be flower and no good for eating at all. And purple sprouting is one of those plants that on paper is hard to justify. You sow it in April, plant it out in May, and it sits there unproductive right through to the following spring. But it's worth it, because purple sprouting broccoli, fresh from the garden, is one of life's great treats. And the reason I'm clearing it is because I want to plant beetroot into this spot. And it is really important at this time of year that if you are growing vegetables, to keep the succession going, use every square inch. And that means that as spring opens out into summer, you will get a really rich and varied harvest of as many different types of vegetables as possible coming through day by day. On today's programme, Carol celebrates Verbena bonariensis, which is one of the very best supporting stars of the summer border.
Individual plants are fascinating, but the real thrill of gardening comes when you start putting them together to create your very own garden pictures.
We go to Cumbria to meet a young gardener who combines a taste for the tropical with a passionate devotion to dahlias.
So this is my allotment. I grow about 300 dahlias every year and about 19 different varieties, and it's looking absolutely fantastic.
And I will be explaining all the mysteries of Mediterranean herbs. This is where the early purple sprouting broccoli was, and I've just dug it over and raked it. And I'm going to be putting some beetroot in here. So just rake that over, get a nice smooth tilth. And I've got three varieties of beetroot. I've got Boltardi, which is a tried and tested variety, very good for early sowings and resists bolting. I've got Chioggia, which I like particularly. It's got these concentric pink and white rings. And then one which I haven't grown before, which is Burpees Golden. And it's been recommended because it's exceptionally sweet with yellow flesh. Make a drill with my fingers on this side. And I'm going to do a double row of each variety. So we'll start with Boltardi. Okay, a light sprinkle. It is always better to have the seeds too far apart than too close. And then I can cover it over. I'll just flip that like that and like that. It's going quite warm. After such a cold April, it's a joy to have a little bit of heat. Although I grow them in a bed, there's no reason why you can't grow them in a container. But just give enough depth, because as well as the beetroot itself, you've got the roots coming down from the bottom. So it does need to have a depth of about a foot or so, or 18 inches. I make 2 or even 3 sowings of beetroot. The first, as soon as the ground is ready. The second, round about the middle to the end of May. And you can make a third sowing in June or even early July for winter harvest. Now, I started gardening when I was very young, mainly just to help out because we had a large garden and it was all hands on deck. But very quickly, I discovered that I loved growing vegetables, and I've loved it ever since. And I think for all of us, it's important that we find that key that unlocks the garden for us. And we paid a visit to Cumbria, to a young gardener who at an early age has discovered a real passion for a group of plants which I think it's fair to say are very different to beetroot.
I'm Cody and I'm 19 years old and I live at home with my mum, dad and my older brother. When it comes to planting stuff in the garden, it's got to go through me first before it makes it into the garden. This garden means a lot to me because it's the place where my mum and dad let me just go absolutely crazy with planting, and it's just somewhere where you can come and relax and just enjoy and just kind of forget about what's going on in the world. So the garden's about 40 square metres. We have it divided into two sections, which up here is the top half, which is the tropical outside family area. And then we have the polytunnel down on the bottom, which is very much propagation. I've always loved tropical plants. It all began when I think I was about 10 or 11, when my mum and dad bought me a small little greenhouse, and I was more excited about kind of what grew underneath the soil instead of how the plants grew. So plants would never last very long in the garden before I'd pull them up and have a look what was going on underneath. I've tried to create a space here that's kind of very impact with lots of greens. I absolutely adore kind of different leaf textures, how they bounce off each other. I think layers in a garden are very important because you've got to get different heights, so there's always a point of interest. So the things I think work really well together are the cannas, the lobelia and the artemisia, because they're all different leaf textures, they're all different heights. And also things like the cosmos with the tetrapanax. So in the corner I've got a Melianthus major. This is a really unusual plant. It's quite special. It's got these very silvery leaves on it. They're also evergreen so that they add a little bit of interest through the winter. Bought it as a tiny little plant about 4 years ago. It's got a very, very fantastic red flower, but unfortunately I don't think I'll ever see it just because it doesn't get warm enough here. So for now we'll just have to deal with the silvery leaves. I work at a garden centre. I'm always working with plants, whether or not that's a work aspect or here at home in the garden. I can start and then 6 hours later I realise that it's tea time and I need to go in for my tea. So I've used quite a lot of trees in the garden. I think height is very important because you can always go as high as you wish, but outwards you're a little bit more restricted. So height is always one of those things that you should definitely include in the garden. My dad, he's created his dream pond. It's absolutely huge. It's 8 foot by 8 foot, and it goes down about 5 foot as well. I think water in a garden is just necessary. It just creates a very relaxing atmosphere. So this is an Acer I've planted. I planted it here because it also creates a really nice block of greenery here on the edge of the pond, and it also creates quite a lot of nice shadows as well on the water below. The polytunnel's not the bog standard growing veg and tomatoes and cucumbers. I've just filled it with lots of tropicals. Stuff grows extremely rapid in there. So it's created this really big jungle effect. This is a very small area, but we've really kind of rammed the plants in. And I think that's the best way of making a small space look bigger. I have a few dahlias here in the garden, but I usually have those up at my allotment, which is kind of where I go absolutely crazy with dahlias. And up there is just absolute flower power. It's just colouring. So this is my allotment. I grow about 300 dahlias every year and about 19 different varieties, and it's looking absolutely fantastic. So a couple of years ago, I was at my local flower show and I approached the local hero, Jack Gott, who grows lots of dahlias. And he kind of took me under his wing. He gave me a couple of dahlias one year and I just built up my collection. My allotment's just here, and then just across my shoulder is Jack Gott's allotment. He grows an absolute amazing amount of dahlias and it's only 2 allotments away from me. I always get advice from him and see what's new and see what dahlias he's growing. So this dahlia here, this is Kilburn Glow. This is an absolutely amazing dahlia. It's only about 3 years old, but it has this most iridescent red colour and it has these really, really nice kind of yellow specks in the centre of the flower here. These dahlias here, I've done a little bit of an experiment this year, so I've left them all in the ground and I didn't mulch them, I didn't do anything over winter, and they have just come back up and they are in their full glory at the moment. The dahlias, they're from Mexico, so they like very free-draining soil. The tuber holds most of the moisture, so you don't have to water them too much, even though we've had quite a lot of dry this year. I've not watered them once, and they're still doing absolutely amazing. So it proves that you don't always have to spend hours and hours caring for them. So the common problem with dahlias is that they get eaten by earwigs. So I've done a little experiment this year and I've got 2 rows of dahlias and I've rubbed the greasy balm onto one side of the dahlias and on the next I haven't. And what I've found is that the dahlias that haven't got the greasy product on, they've been eaten, and the ones that have, they've all been absolutely okay. When I've seen that they've eaten a couple of dahlias, it gets me very annoyed because it ruins the perfect form of the dahlia. The one thing about dahlias that are amazing is that they carry their flower from around about August time till the end of the year as well, so they'll go straight until the first frost. It's always one of those things that people miss this time of year, is a bit of colour in the garden, and they're just such a good doer. So this is a cactus type dahlia and it's known as Kiwi Gloria. I normally put these into a bouquet just to kind of lower the tone of the bunch with all these very vivid oranges and yellows. So if I was to plant this into the garden, I would put it into more of a sheltered area just to protect it from the rain and the wind, as they do get battered quite easily. I will always have dahlias in my gardens. It's just one plant that I've fallen in love with and I'll always have to grow. I couldn't live without plants. I don't know what I'd do. I absolutely love plants.
Clearly, Cody was born to garden. And it's very impressive, the knowledge and the dedication that he has at 19. But I also like the fact that older gardeners are steering him and giving him advice and inspiration, and he's gaining from that, they're being inspired by him. It's a good story all around. Now, here in the greenhouse, at this time of year, it always gets really full. And my dahlia plants, these are the ones that I've grown from seed, the cacti mix, which I hope lots of you have grown too, are developing nicely. Not quite ready to go outside yet. And there are 2 things to consider if you've got a greenhouse, particularly for this sort of mid-spring stage, because the nights can be very cold, which is why we keep plants in the greenhouse, but the days can be very hot, particularly with the sun coming through the glass. So if you're protecting plants from the cold, don't forget to protect them from the heat too. Open it out wide, open the ventilation, dampen it down, and that just means wetting the floor so you raise the humidity and cool the temperature, because young plants can burn up in just a matter of minutes at this time of year, as well as freeze at night. Now, it's time to visit the first of your gardens, and we're going to Manchester to start with, to visit a gardener who's had to adapt her approach to suit her own particular set of circumstances.
Hi everyone, I'm Kerry. I've been blind since birth and I absolutely love gardening. I think the fact that I can't see definitely influences the type of plants I choose to grow. I tend to go for things that have a very distinctive texture to me or that have a particularly strong scent. So for example, with my sunflowers, they have like a sort of rough texture, but it's quite a pleasant one. But then the flowers, they have a very distinctive texture. So when it comes to the practical tasks of gardening, I do face some challenges when doing things that people might find quite straightforward, but I love a challenge. When I'm planting, I tend to use this small spoon here, and again, this is for me all by touch, so it's just good to have a bit more control over what I'm doing. And now I'm going to water the compost. So for me, using a big watering can could be a bit of a disaster. So I get a little washing up liquid bottle so I can really be in charge of how much water I'm putting into this compost. Now I'm going to make a small hole into this pot. So they say about 1/2 inch for the sunflowers. So I used a pencil, kind of holding it the wrong way around here. Then I take a sunflower seed. Now I've put these into a little bowl again because it's just easier for me than trying to kind of get them out of a packet and put them in. So it's just kind of little simple things really that, you know, they really do help to make this more accessible for me. And obviously, like, I think it probably takes me a little bit longer to plant these seeds, but to be honest, I don't mind that because the reward is great.
The truth is that one of the less heralded secrets of good gardening is paying attention, taking real care. And of course, that is exactly what Kerry is doing. And that's why her plants look so fantastically healthy. Now, lots of us grow vegetables, but we tend to slightly overlook growing herbs. And yet, herbs are something you can use in every meal. And you don't need a garden. They grow really well in pots. And I'm going to make a little Mediterranean herb garden in a container. Now this is a terracotta pot, which is much better for Mediterranean herbs than plastic because it doesn't hold water so well. And the biggest enemy of Mediterranean herbs is sitting in cold, wet soil. Get a curved piece of pot. You put it over the top of the hole, which doesn't stop the drainage in any way, but does stop the compost falling through. Now, compost for Mediterranean herbs is absolutely critical. And I'm doing what I say you never should do, and I'm recycling spent compost. It's extremely gritty. And what you want for Mediterranean herbs is poor growing conditions. So spent compost is for them ideal if it is gritty enough. Now we'll put some in the bottom. Now the easiest way to do that is simply to buy some horticultural grit and mix it 50-50 with a normal peat-free compost. That is the base that it's going to grow in. Now I want a centerpiece of rosemary, and this is a particularly upright variety called Miss Jessop's Upright, and will thrive in this environment. So that will go in the middle, and that will grow about double that size. And then I'm going to have some sage. Now, you've got ordinary sage. This is Salvia officinalis. You can get pineapple sage, you can have purple sage, and although it looks good, I don't think tastes as good as a green sage. And best of all, you've got a narrow leaf sage. Now, this I've grown from seed, and although the leaves are very narrow, they're absolutely delicious. So we'll pop that there like that, and in fact we've got room for 2 sages, I think. Now we definitely want some thyme, and like sage there are a number of different types of thyme. You can get a compact form which has got softer growth. And of course, it's the soft growth that you want. And just by touching that, I can tell you the fragrance is fantastic. So I'm going to plant that in there. And there's also a lemon thyme, which many people say is best for cooking. So I'm going to add that in too. And this is quite a large pot, but we'll find space for it over here, like that. I definitely want some of the oregano. It spreads like a weed in the herb garden, but we let it, because when it flowers, the bees love it. This is a prostrate rosemary. Prostrate rosemary wants to grow sideways, and there's no reason why you can't grow it to hang over the side of a pot. And now I'm going to put some soil around that. And then use a lot of horticultural grit. And it's not just a top dressing, this is actually right around the roots. And it means there's just no risk of them sitting in too much moisture, because the water will drain through that and away. Now, it is important that you put this in the sunniest spot that you have. They really cannot have too much sunshine or heat. And if you've only got shade, then probably Mediterranean herbs are not going to be very successful for you. But there are lots of other herbs you can grow, and we'll come to those in a few weeks' time. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking that if you want trees, then at very least you need a garden, and if you want large trees, then you need a very large garden. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, as Arit discovered when she went to Milan to visit an extraordinary project.
Milan, one of the great design capitals of Europe. Like all cities across the world, it's exciting, busy and vibrant. But it comes at a cost. 10 years ago, Milan was listed as the most polluted city in Europe. We all know that green spaces are part of the solution for cleaner air. But with a lack of precious space here on the ground, trees are often having to make way for businesses and homes. One forward-thinking architect and a landscape designer have come up with a radical solution and are spearheading a worldwide movement. It all started up there in the Italian sky. Welcome to our gardening future, the Bosco Verticale. These two extraordinary towers opened in 2014. Bosco Verticale means vertical forest. Up there are 700 trees, 5,000 shrubs and 15,000 climbers and perennials, all growing and thriving up to 27 stories high. That's 110 metres. These towers are phenomenal. The scale of them, I think, is something that I probably underestimated. I've come to meet internationally acclaimed architect Stefano Boeri to find out why he created this mini ecosystem in the sky.
Honestly, I've always been obsessed by trees. My dream was to imagine a building on architecture where trees were present not simply as a decoration, but like living subjects.
How do the buildings cope with the weight of those trees up at a height like that?
No, it's not so complicated. You are, in a certain way, preparing the structure to have these heavy perimeters. And then we work to define the best composition of the soil, because the soil should not be too heavy, for sure, but at the same time not too light, otherwise the roots of the trees could move too much. Now we have, I think, something like 18 different species of birds that are living and nesting in the vertical forest. Then also, that's an amazing confirm of how biodiversity could be implemented also in a very polluted and dense urban environment.
Laura Laura Gatti is a landscape consultant. She worked closely with Stefano to create this incredible sky forest. Oh, wow. Every single tree has been carefully selected.
We chosen 20 species of different trees, also from the native around here or across Italy. For instance, we have a kind of ash, Fraxinus ornus, that is extremely adapted to the heat in the city. We have crab apples of different varieties, yes, and Lagerstroemia for the flower in summer also. What we are trying to do with not only with the trees but with the underlayer is found flowers and plants that you are used to see when you go outside for a walk in the country.
Trees and shrubs grow in planters that have been integrated into the walls of the balconies to ensure stability. They chose trees which have a deep root system so they could cope with wind. For irrigation, groundwater from Milan is pumped into containers so they don't have to use drinking water. 3 membranes protect the building from water damage and stop roots getting through.
We have mainly deciduous here because of the risk of snow also.
You've got to think of everything: snow, heat, wind.
Sure.
So even 27 floors up, it's a case of right plant, right place.
This is a parrotia. A parrotia is one of the most interesting trees here at the Bosco Verticale because it's extremely efficient in capture pollution because of the leaves. There are raphi and there are hair on the lower side, and is also interesting because it's a huge amount of leaves, a high canopy.
That tree canopy also offers shade and reduces the temperature of the building, which can only be a positive factor in the fight against climate change. It goes to show that this is going to be something that can be created for our futures and that we can use our spaces in such a way that is the perfect combination for both people, plants and places.
It does seem to me that this clearly has to be a model of how towns and cities could be. And the advantage of living with trees and plants around you has got to be important. I think it's a wonderful thing. Now, going from the extreme and the wonderful to the very ordinary, which is picking rhubarb, but rhubarb is special too. It's delicious. And of course, the key to picking rhubarb is you don't cut it, you pull. And you get a little bit of the base with it because there is a risk, if you cut it, of leaving a wound that lets in infection. Now, still to come on today's programme.
Carol directs her spotlight onto one of our garden favourites, the beautiful and versatile Verbena bonariensis.
In this inspiring border, it lends a lovely rhythm to the whole place.
And we have another chance to enjoy a stunning national collection of wisteria.
If only you could smell through the lens. That is gorgeous.
But first, it's time to visit one of your gardens again. And this is taking us across the Atlantic, right across the other side of the United States of America to Northern California.
I'm Nancy from Napa Valley. My husband and I built this Potager's garden last year. When Monty was saying to toss out your bulbs and plant them where they land, I did. And it turned out really beautiful, so I wanted to share that. For this winter garden, I have lettuce and chard, and some onions and leeks. And the yellow that you see it's going to seed is Mitsuna, and the bees just love it, so I'm leaving it there. I planted parsley along the edge too. It just was a beautiful little front border compared to this dark red lettuce, and it does certainly set the tulips off. And so lots of butterhead lettuces. Oh, I would just recommend this if you've never planted any. It's so lovely and delicious. There's a bunch of them. And I have weeded minimally, not terribly much. Summer, I guess we have more weeds. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like we've had too many weeds. I haven't planted spinach before, so I'm inexperienced at this. And I just seeded them thinking I don't know what will grow. Surprise, lots of them grow. It's been such a pleasure to experience this spring garden. So much fun to watch every stage of growth. It'll be really nice to see what the summer garden has to offer us. May your gardens also give you such joy.
Well, thank you for watching.
I thought that combination that Nancy created of combining tulips with vegetables looked great. I must try that. Now, I'm going to plant some heleniums. No other plant has such a fabulous range of colours within the orange spectrum. And from late July right through into autumn, they add a richness to any border. Absolutely love them. Now, I've got a variety here which is very well known, has been grown in gardens for years and years and years, and is one of the best, called Moorheim Beauty. A lovely, rich, orangey red colour. Like all heleniums, it does need some sunshine, so I'm putting this closer to the front of the border than I have done in the past. The thing about heleniums that I've learned is that it's no good planting them in autumn. Now is the time to plant heleniums. Give them all summer to grow a good root system, and they are much more likely both to perform well and also to last. Planting a group of 3, and I will space these out. Now, these will form a solid clump, and if you do have an established clump of heleniums, it's a good idea to divide them every 3 or 4 years, and that will reinvigorate them and also give you fresh plants. If you've got a very light soil, if it's sandy or chalky, beef it up. Add some compost to the soil, and then significantly mulch them. Obviously mulch them after you've given them a really good soak. Now, they will grow about 3 foot high. You can get some varieties that grow as much as 5 or even 6 foot tall, and also others that are shorter, and I've got one here. Now, I've not grown this before, but I'm going to put it right at the front of the border, again to give it maximum sunshine, and it is a variety called Red Jewel. Now, Red Jewel only grows to about 2 foot tall, and like all red heleniums, the more sun it gets, the richer its colour will be. There we go. They should start flowering round about the end of July, August, and if you deadhead them, it does increase flowering. Now, obviously, when you plant anything at this time of year, you should water it in well. But heleniums are a plant that hate drying out. So not only do they need watering when you plant them, but if you have a dry period, if it doesn't rain for 10 days or something, give them a good drink. But I can't wait to see them flower, because these are one of the stars of the late summer border. Although it's not always the star plants that really transform a garden, as Carol discovered when she visited Silver Street Farm in Devon.
Even the best planned borders by the most experienced gardeners from time to time can fall into lapses where everything seems to be a little bit dull. But never fear, to the rescue come stalwart plants, which can either take centre stage or accompany other plants in the chorus line. These are the plants we can rely on to really put that pizzazz back into our gardens. This is Verbena bonariensis. It's what you call a true stalwart. You can find it all over this garden in different areas, sometimes in great drifts like this, and occasionally as individual plants. Although it really appreciates decently drained soil, it'll grow practically anywhere. Give it some sunshine though. Now it spreads itself around by seed, and people will tell you that you can propagate it from cuttings. Yes, you can, but why bother? Simply take some seed when it's really dry on the plant, shake it out into a paper bag and then sow it onto a tray of decent seed compost. You'll have plants aplenty to go all over your garden and use in lots of different ways. In this border, the verbena just pops up here and there. It does it in exactly the right place. It forms these punctuation marks, and you focus on the main event, which is this glorious white aster. It's now called Eurybia schreberi, but it makes these big, soft clouds of white. Absolutely brilliant at this time of year. It has dark stems too. But that darkness, that sort of clarity, almost black, is repeated again in this Miscanthus sinensis. It's such a pretty, dainty little one with these silken inflorescences. Give it a bit of sunshine, it'll even cope with quite heavy soil. But here, it makes the perfect backdrop to the Eurybia and, of course, the verbena. Here, Aster fricatii monk shares the stage with Verbena bonariensis. They both have very, very similar sort of colour. So it's a lovely kind of harmony. But elsewhere in this bed, where the verbena is sprinkled through, it does different things according to which plant it's next to. In this combination, the colour is very, very similar, but the form is totally different. But then you come across here and you get a completely different sort of effect. From the same plant, the verbena, but this time married to this Petrinia. This is Petrinia scabiosifolia. And the pair of them have very, very similar sort of habits, but their colour couldn't be more different one from the other. And isn't it a fabulous combination? Who wouldn't want that? Two really simple, easy to grow plants. Sometimes the zingiest combinations are those where just two plants spar with each other. Here, the verbena comes up against real competition from Tithonia, a Mexican daisy. Three self-seeders keep each other company. Two umbels, Fennel and Amiv, have decided to get close and intimate with Verbena bonariensis. Flanked on each side by its close cousin Verbena hastata, the solid crimson heads of Persicaria fat domino are shown off to full advantage. Sometimes a combination can be really subtle and yet work brilliantly. Take this one. Three plants, the Calaminta in the foreground, Verbenas, Hastata and Bonariensis, and then in the background, the gigantic Eupatorium. But if you put the colour of their flowers all together, they're so close, so very similar. Lavender, purple, and a lovely sort of crimsony maroon. But why is it that it works so brilliantly? Well, it's the form, it's the texture. But you can't necessarily do it on this scale, but you don't have to. Even in a small garden in the corner, you can create this sort of effect by just using less plants. And I think they prove the point that you don't have to have discords and contrasts to really make a scintillating picture. In this inspiring border, Verbena bonariensis has sprinkled itself right the way through, and it lends a lovely rhythm to the whole place. And it's a great mixture of wonderful grasses. Each of them recurs over and over again, so you've got the pale sort of oaty look of this Descampsia. This is Descampsia caespitosa. But then, much more definite and deliberate is this lovely Pennisetum. This is Pennisetum alopecuroides. When you look at these stems and this fluffy head, it just looks like one of those furry caterpillars who's climbed to the top of the stem and then has no idea where to go next. But isn't that darkness beautiful? Picks up on the dark calyx of the verbena and on the stems of this lovely umbel. This is Solenum wallicianum. It's so beautiful. This one absolutely sparkles at this time of year, but the whole planting is an absolute masterpiece. Individual plants are fascinating, but the real thrill of gardening comes when you start putting them together. There are so many easygoing stalwart plants that you can combine with others to create your very own garden pictures.
Of course, Carol is absolutely right. It's the combination of plants that both makes them so interesting and also so personal. And at the moment here at Longmeadow, one of the best combinations is very simple. And it is the electric green of the euphorbias against the intensity of colour of the tulips. Now, obviously, this doesn't last for very long, a week or so at most, but while it does, it is magical. But there's so much more now following on. And I noticed the other day that the first flowers of wisteria were opening just down the road, and that will be happening all over the country in the coming weeks. But I doubt if any look as magnificent as Chris Lane's National Collection of Wisteria down in Sittingbourne in Kent. And it's well worth paying him another visit.
I love wisterias because of the fact that they produce an abundance of long raceme flowers, and particularly the Chinese wisteria and the Yamafuji wisteria from Japan have got such wonderful scent. So a combination of scent and flower, they are terrific plants for planting in the garden. Wisterias belong to the legume family. Now, legume family includes things like sweet peas, various other things like that. And they have a typical pea flower. Wisteria flowers are produced on a raceme. The individual flowers open from the base of the raceme down to the apex. So you can see they're well in flower at the top and there's buds at the bottom. The flower buds at the bottom are facing in a different direction, so they rotate over 180 degrees so that the back of the individual flower, which is called the flag, is facing outwards, with a small yellow nectar guide there for the bees. And when a bee alights on the flower, it pushes apart the two side petals, which are called wings, and down on the basal petal, which is called the keel, to reveal the stigma and the stamens. So it will deposit pollen on the stigma, it will collect pollen, and then take to another flower. There are 4 species of wisteria in the world, and the most commonly seen one is Wisteria sinensis. This was introduced from China. Wisteria sinensis flowers early in the season. It's about the first of the wisterias that we grow that comes into flower, especially when grown on a south-facing wall. It can also be grown as a standard and to a degree on a pergola. The home of wisteria is really in Japan, and there are 2 species there, Wisteria brachybotrytis, which is called Yamafuji, and Wisteria floribunda, which is called Nodofuji. This is an extraordinary cultivar that they've called Kiyoshaku. It differs from the other wisterias we've talked about so far in the fact that it twines clockwise. The others are anti-clockwise. And this particular cultivar has the longest known racemes in any Wisteria floribunda and can be up to 1 metre in length. The reason these racemes lengthen is that from the tip, you can see that the distance between the pedicels, the part that holds each flower, is quite short. Whereas on the flowers that are starting to open, the distance is greater. So it just elongates as it goes down with the flowers opening. This is my favourite Wisteria floribunda. It's a cultivar called Kimono. And the reason I love this plant is the whitish flower, which is suffused nicely with a pinkish mauve colour. And the reverse, the calyx at the back, is really quite a deep mauve colour, and that's visible when you look at the plant as a whole. It's not too vigorous, it's fairly compact, it's easy to train, and if only you could smell through the lens, that is gorgeous. Wisterias can be grown in many ways. I suppose the ultimate and easiest way, if you can plant one into a tree. Best planted on the north side, as it will grow into that tree and go towards the sun. There are sun worshippers, and for a while you won't see anything, and then a few years later on, the whole tree will be festooned with flowers. You can also grow them as standards or even as shrubs. Standards, you need a good strong stake, and you train it up that stake and form a branch framework at the top, cutting all the low shoots off. Grown as a shrub, it's just like a standard but low down. One of the most iconic ways of growing wisteria is on a pergola or an archway. Another reason for my love of wisterias is a love of nature as well. And when these are in flower, the perfume that's given off by them attracts bees, not just honeybees, but bumblebees. This is something that gardeners can do to help the bee population. I just love them. Wisteria, the king of climbers.
Wisteria have all the right ingredients, wonderful flowers, and above all, fantastic fragrance. And I'm going to add here to the Paradise Garden a bulb that also fits that bill. They are lilies, and lilies, of course, have probably the most voluptuous flowers that you can grow in the garden, coupled with this amazing heady scent that will fill the evening air. Now, lilies always come wrapped up and they dry out easily, so only take them out when you're ready to plant. Now, I've got two types. The first one is a martagon lily, and this is Lilium Claude Schride, and I've chosen it because it's got the most incredible dark flowers. And martagon lilies like Longmeadow. They grow in the jewel garden and spread and last for ages. And the other lily has rather a confusing name. It's called Black Beauty, but actually it's a really rich pink. And lily bulbs have these overlapping scales on the outside of the lily. They don't have the smooth outer carapace that you get on a daffodil or a tulip. So you have to be quite careful when you're handling them. Now, when you're planting lilies, the things to remember are, first of all, these do not come from baked hillsides like, say, tulips do. They come from woodland edges, and they are plants that like their feet to be in the shade and their heads to be in the sun. And they do like a nice open root run. So if you've got very heavy clay, add maybe some grit if you've got it, but certainly plenty of organic matter. And likewise, if you've got very light soil, beef it up a bit. What we've done here is add masses of grit, cover it over, and they should go in about 6 inches deep. And you don't want lilies closer than about a foot. One of the things I've done is get some canes, and I'm going to mark where I've planted them. And that is both so I can keep an eye on them, and also if I want to add any other plants in here, which I will do, I don't plant on top of them. And if they're looked after, they will last a long time. Now, this Black Beauty will flower in July. So there might be a bit of an overlap with the martagons, because the martagons flower earlier in June. One final thing is that if you're planting these now and it says they will grow to 8 foot or whatever, that's unlikely to happen in the first year. Give them a chance. By year 2 or 3, that's when they hit their full stride. Now it's time to go to the last of your gardens to see a plant that could hardly be more different to lilies than you could imagine.
Croeso i Gymru, my name is Ian Jones. Welcome to my garden here in Glanconwy in North Wales.
These tree ferns originate from Tasmania and have quite an interesting history. They arrived in the country as ballast from ships and then were then discarded at the side of the docks. And then they noticed that these trunks had started sprouting leaves. What you have in essence are trunks that are made up of bundles of roots. You can cut a tree fern in half, stick the top part into the ground, and provided it's kept moist, it'll start to grow again. It's very important that when you buy tree ferns that you make sure that they've been harvested sustainably. So I'm standing in the middle of the river next to my garden. It's nice and peaceful and idyllic at the moment, but in the winter it's a raging torrent and almost reaches the height of the garden itself. So these gabion baskets protect the riverbank, so the roots of the tree ferns further bind the riverbank together. We've also tied the tree ferns to the fence, just in case they're washed downstream. Some of these are 200 to 300 years old. They're quite slow growing plants and take maybe 30 years to grow the first foot. But nobody gets to appreciate this view unless they're standing in the middle of the riverbank like I'm doing at the moment.
Bye. Come on, we're going this way. Come on. Well, Ian's tree ferns are magnificent, and I love their architectural quality. the way that they do feel genuinely prehistoric. Now, I've got a couple. They're nothing like as big or as old as his, but I still love them. Tree ferns do best in light shade. If they're exposed to full sun, they dry out. And although tree ferns are not entirely tender, they will take some frost. It's a good idea to protect them over winter. So I've wrapped them up. And the key thing to protect is not the stem, but the crown. Now I've got thick fleece under there, and I put some straw in the crown. And what you're trying to avoid is ice forming in the crown. If it fills with water and then freezes hard, that can kill it. And if you keep the stem nice and wet and the air around it as humid as possible, then your tree ferns will be truly happy. Now, if you want to be truly happy this weekend, here are some jobs for you. If you take a plant that's been raised undercover and plant it out now, there's a real risk that it won't survive any frost. So they need hardening off. Ideally, you do this in stages. First of all, in a cold frame for a week or two, and then into a protected spot for another week. By that time, the risk of frost should have passed, and the plants have adapted to almost anything the weather can throw at them. Whilst most herbaceous perennials can be divided, planted or moved in autumn or early spring, grasses are much better left until now and any time over the coming month. You can lift them and move them or divide them as normal, but do so when the soil is warm, and they will adapt quickly and grow strongly. Pumpkins and squashes are very sensitive to cold weather, so it's a bit early to plant them direct, but you can start to raise them under cover. Sow 2 seeds to a pot, and you'll weed out the weaker of the two when they germinate, placing the seeds on edge and covering them over. Put them somewhere warm, a windowsill above a radiator is fine. Water them, then when the nights have heated up, you can start to harden them off, ready to plant out around the middle of June. The erythroniums, I think, are at their very best right now. And this is a variety called Pagoda, which has this combination of very delicate bent back lemon yellow flowers and then great fat glossy green leaves. And what they like best is the cool shade and dappled light underneath shrubs and trees. And when the light filters and spangles through the branches, they glow with colour. That's it for today. We've run out of time, and I'm going to be away next week, so you will be in the capable hands of Adam, and I'll see you back here at Longmeadow in a fortnight's time. So until then, bye-bye.